In today's video, we're going to make a scrappy patchwork mini tote bag, and it's reversible. Let's get started. So first off, obviously you're going to need some fabric scraps. I got these from a yard sale for $4. It was like a whole lot of them in like this little baggie, and it was amazing. And I thought they worked very well together. So you're going to want to cut your scraps to be a uniform size. The size that mine ended up being was about 6.5 by 6.5 square. I've also got my batting that I got from the thrift store, and I'm still using it. And I am going to include the big mistake that I had that happened with using this batting. Right now, I'm just putting my squares together to see exactly how I want them to lay out. I did mess around with this a few times. Once I got a configuration that I liked, this is where things start to go south. But again, I'm going to explain everything that's going on in my head while I'm doing this. We're going to sew these two scraps onto the batting, right sides together. And I was like, okay, I'll go ahead and start on this other side while I'm doing it. Big mistake. Big mistake. I decided not to do it on the other side, and I'm glad that I didn't, but I went ahead and pinned it. It's gonna all make sense later in the video, trust me. Now, if you want a bigger tote bag, you can use bigger scraps. That's just how big the ones that I had ended up being, which is why this is a mini tote bag. I attached the first two squares to the batting, and as you can see, the batting, it was not big enough to accommodate the two squares. And this is really where I messed up on this entire project. Things could have gone a lot smoother if I had just prepared in a different way. But I wanted to include the mistakes that I made so that hopefully it won't happen to you. But this is me putting the squares onto one side of the tote bag and trying to figure out what orientation that I liked. Now, here I am attaching the extra squares to the squares that are already attached to the batting. Again, this is a very complicated kind of way of doing it, and I will probably do a future video where I simplify the process because I'll know what I'm doing. But you want to make sure that those seams are nested if you are particular about making sure that everything's perfect. But this is around the time that I figure out that I have made a mistake. If you can see right here, the fabric is not sewn together in that spot because I did not have any batting. So in my brain, I'm going through all of the different situations on oh, I should have done the batting first. And that's me looking defeated because I'm like, oh, I figured out exactly what I've done wrong. But you know what? In the face of defeat, we will carry on and we will figure it out. Here I'm measuring how much batting that I need to add to my square to make sure that it accommodates the outside squares. And in my brain, I measured and I was like, oh, I'm gonna cut these and everything's gonna work out just fine. It in fact did not work out fine. There was so much piecing that I needed to do to make this work, and it was very unnecessary just because I was trying to use all of the scraps that I had. In the future, when I make this, I'm going to absolutely make sure that the batting, whatever batting, if it's batting or fabric or anything like that, I'm going to make sure that it matches the size of my patchwork squares from the get-go, and I won't have to spend the time to piece things together. I did not bother with the green square and trying to make it perfect. I honestly just wanted to get the bag done at this point. On the other side of the tote bag, what I did was I combined the pieces of batting to the size that I needed it with a zigzag stitch. And here I am zigzag stitching the batting together so that I had a square that was the appropriate size from the get-go, because I learned my lesson from the previous side. And I'll also show you what settings that I use for the zigzag stitch for attaching batting together. I use the widest one that my machine has and a length of 2. So now that we have our batting and our patchwork the appropriate size, then we can get to work. So this is me working on the other side once I learned my lesson. Once you have your sides to the size that you would like them to be, you're going to need your lining material to be the exact same size. This is all a solid piece that came from the exact same yard sale, and all of the pieces coordinated together, which was kind of nice. But here I am, I'm using one of my mini rulers that I've acquired over time to cut everything down to size. You're going to want your lining pieces to match your outer pieces. Again, this whole process would be so much easier from the get-go if everything matched and you just had everything cut to size. I just went into this all willy-nilly because that's just how I roll with most sewing projects. I just go into it and I learn as I go. Now here are my handle pieces. I made them 30 inches by 4 inches. And I also did these 2 different ways, and I learned which way that I like better. The first way that I did was I had my iron, I ironed it in half, and then I ironed the hem, and then I did a top stitch. Now that is an extra step that I feel like is unnecessary. What you can do is you can just make a tube and turn it inside out. And I'll show you how I did that on the second handle, because again, I was just trying stuff, trying things, seeing what works for me. Everybody has their own kind of way of doing things, and I do understand that the turning the tube method is just easier. But I did this one for the first strap, and on the second strap you can see that I did it the normal way, went to the sewing machine and then turned it inside out and gave it a good press. I love my little mini iron. It's just convenient. It's a space saver, and when you don't have that space, it just kind of helps. Now on both straps, you're going to do a top stitch about a 1/4 inch, maybe a little less than a 1/4 inch. And here I'm showing that we're going to sew the 3 sides, and I'll take it to the machine and get all 3 of those. We're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can do 3/8 just to give a little extra security. Make sure that you've got all the layers taken care of. And then we're going to do the exact same process on the lining material. Now, the main thing about the lining material, you're going to leave an opening where you don't sew it, because that's where you're going to turn everything inside out. It's about a 5 or 6 inch spot that you don't sew. You're going to leave that open. Once you get everything sewn together, you're going to clip your corners so that everything is nice and pointy when you use your tool. And we cut all of our threads because they just kind of get in the way. They'll get in your sewing machine and just mess things up. Right now, what we're doing is we're turning our outside material and making sure those corners are pointy. And we're going to attach our handles in this step. Now our handles have already been done. They've already been top stitched and they're ready to attach. Now what I did is, because this was a mini tote, I did approximately 2 inches from each edge. This can vary depending on the size of your tote bag, but I went with 2 inches because it just visually looked good to me. Another thing that you want to make sure when you're attaching the handles is that there isn't a twist in them, and you want to make sure that they lie nice and flat. I did have my handles super duper long because I thought that the tote bag was going to end up bigger, but I ended up cutting off about 6 or 7 inches off of the handles because I wanted them to be proportionally correct to the main size of the bag. So now I clip it. You can see that it's not twisted, and we're going to go ahead and reinforce those handles, and you're going to repeat the process on the other side of the bag. Now, the place where the fabric was not connected before, I'm going to fix that before I get everything connected, because I don't want there to be a huge gap. Now that we've got our lining fabric and our outside fabric ready to go, you're going to take your outside and you're going to tuck it inside of the lining, and it's going to be right sides together. You're going to clip everything around the outside, and on this seam I did about a 3/8 seam allowance versus the 1/4 inch, just to make sure that I got all the layers. There's a lot of strings involved when you're working with scrappy materials. Just know that that's normal, and that's just kind of part of the process. Now that hole that we left open on the lining, you're going to turn everything inside out. Right here I'm pulling the outside fabric out through that hole, and we're going to close the hole. We're going to give it an iron. We're going to do a top stitch, and we are almost done with our little scrappy bag. Right here, I am making sure all of my corners are nice and sharp before I close that up. And we're just gonna do a little stitch. I did use white thread on this because that's what was in my machine. But if you are super particular about it matching, you could use a black or a pink or whatever would go along with the motif of your bag. Now that we've got the lining closed up, we are just going to do a top stitch around the edge of the bag all the way around, just to make sure that everything lays in place and that it's got that finished look. I gave it a little iron, although I don't think it really made a difference at all, but I did it anyway because I'm trying to be better about using my iron. But I did a very small seam around the edge, and now our bag is complete. You've got the formal side, which is pink and black, and you've also got the scrappy side. The only thing is, if you have the liner side out, you will see the seam where you closed it up. So that's another thing to where you may want to use a coordinating thread, but for me, I don't really care. And that is how you do a scrappy mini tote bag. I hope that you enjoy, and thank you for watching.